Hello, Lexi. We're going to take a look at your 5 characteristics posting, and I think we have it all queued up. So let's get right into it. So first thing we'll do is take a look at the posting itself, just kind of go over, see if everything is posted the way that we were hoping things would be posted, kind of in the order that we're looking for. So we've got intensity there, we've got temperature, everything seems to be the right size. We could have used some more labels, individual labels. That way we can identify some of the aspects and components that you're working with. Like, for instance, what are the lighting settings that are going on here? That would be helpful if you identify some of them that you would want to use later. Things like the intensity here. What's the ratio? What's the ratio between the key and the fill light? That was kind of the heart of the experiment kind of thing. But overall, looks like everything is there. Looks like your exposures, meaning whether things are too light or too dark, that kind of stuff. Looks like all of that is just fine. Not too light, not too dark, which at this stage is usually about the camera because we had it on program. I'm not expecting the exposures or the way that the camera's taking the photographs to be too terribly off, but it sometimes tells us a little bit about your camera as to whether it's struggling to make photographs under this kind of more controlled lighting scenario. So when we have the direction is really, of the 5, is the most important, really. It's the first one we use because it establishes the key light. It establishes where that key light is, and then it establishes all kinds of other things at the same time, like the mood, sometimes time of day. It establishes the length and the distance of the shadows in perspective to where we are. All kinds of stuff that happens when we place that in a particular place. Also, during that first exercise, we sort of usually will discover some of the direction, some of the positions that we most sort of find appealing. Like, we find our favorites. Like, for instance, mine, I tend to use number 4 and number 6, the ones that are sort of far away, not quite directly behind the objects, but sort of to the sides, but slightly toward the back. That's usually where I find myself locating key lights. Even when I'm outside, I tend to move around places so that the main light source is sort of to the side and slightly to the back. That's just something that I discovered during this. Those are something that hopefully you start to discover. Now, these photographs, the way you've got them organized and the way you have them sort of set up, they're just lovely portraits of bottles, right? And there's nothing wrong with them. They're actually quite beautiful. A little bit out of focus, actually, or they looks like there's a little bit of camera shake or something like that. So that might have been giving you a little bit of trouble. However, they're quite, sort of orderly, right? Not a whole lot happening emotively, though. You're not really too close in here. Here, these 2 photographs are pretty much the same photograph. Just one is a little bit closer to the other. So I'm curious about that. Also in this part of the experiment, the camera should not be moving, yet we're seeing the camera being moved all over the place. So we really don't want that to be happening. The camera should have been steady. The only thing that's moving is the light and the bottles. So the camera should have been just totally steady. But here we can see that the camera's moving. I can tell the camera's moving because I can see the table moving. So the table wouldn't have moved at all. It's just the objects on the table move. So that part, we want to kind of get the right setting there. Because it is really an important part of the composition, is to be able to follow that scenario very closely. Then we get into intensity, and intensity becomes about the relationship between that key light and the fill light. Now, what you're doing here is a pretty good balance. We're getting almost what we call the butterfly effect. And that is where you have the light coming equally from either side, and it's equally lighting either side. And so it's sort of like this symmetry that happens here. You can see this happening. It's almost like we have a seam down the middle and equal lighting on either side. It's almost this bizarre kind of like abstraction, which can really be a wonderful thing if that's what we're going for. We're not, but that's something that you can take later on and decide, oh, that's something I can maybe work with a little bit later. Here we're getting into it a little bit differently. I don't see evidence of a fill light here. I don't see where the fill light is coming. If there was a fill light here, I would see a shadow somewhere. The shadow should be coming somewhere from the other side. Here, all I'm seeing is one light. And so this doesn't have a fill light to it. This may just be an issue that you were having where it was like notes or something, where you were taking photographs and maybe your notes, you couldn't quite identify which was which. That happens. You're probably not the only one that happens to, but when we are using an additional light source, it's going to be always, we're going to see one, we're going to see two lights. So there would be a light on this side. You see a little bit of light over here, but there'll also be, even if it's real subtle, a subtle indication when we see the floor here of a second shadow, because that light is going to produce, no matter how faint, a little bit of a shadow. So that is what we want to work on. We want to, I'd be able to identify the photographs because these look like they are simply one light. Yeah, these are just one light that we're using here, where we should have been using two for intensity. So we can correct that. And that's what we have the resubmits for. This is all about allowing you the freedom to kind of explore, kind of work things out, and if things don't go quite right, to be able to just kind of regroup and have some time now. Not until November are these things due. You can have them done anytime, but you have all the way into November before you really have to really be concentrating on, do I have anything to resubmit? So take that also as to what it is. I'm not saying you're going to get a bad grade or anything. It looks like you have most of what we need completed, but you'll probably want to improve on your grade just based on some of the misdirections that I'm seeing here a little bit. The photographs, by the way, are quite lovely, even though we're missing some of the topics here. Temperature. Now, again, we can get into the compositions a little bit, but this is typical. I see a lot of your peers doing this as well. When we get into the lighting, we start moving lighting around, adjusting the controls of the lighting, paying attention to the cameras. Now we start to forget a little bit about the set. We start to forget a little bit about the compositions. Whereas before, we had fewer things to think about. With direction, all we had to think about was the light, really, and moving the composition around. We could focus. The other one, even with two lights, that's not a lot, but here now we're moving lights around and we're now controlling the color. This is the first time where I start to see students kind of forget about a few things, and that is the composition. And so we tend to start to step backward a little bit in terms of the compositions. And so I think that's what tended to happen here a little bit, is students tend to step backward a little bit. Now we are doing a really lovely shallow depth of field here. This is beautiful. We just need to be a couple of steps closer. That's all. Again, these two photographs are very much similar. One is just a little farther away than the other, way too far away. So you're doing some good things here, some really effective things here. There's just some subtle things that we could do to really improve upon these things, like getting closer, varying the compositions as we go, like this composition and this composition. It's the same photograph, just different lighting settings. Now, I know we were trying to sort of vary the lighting settings, but we don't want to continue to have the same composition with varied lighting settings. Okay, let's take a look at your other ones. Now, the last two, this is when it really starts to, usually for most people, starts to feel a lot more complex, and things start to kind of come together a little bit, because we now are putting things in order. We have a key light, we have now a reflector. Rather than adding that extra light, which can kind of be clumsy, really, to add more light isn't really always the best solution, because it adds that weird shadow. Here, reflecting, we're just recycling the leftover key light. So the key light hits the subjects, passes through, and bounces off this other thing that we have, and it redirects it back in. So we don't have the problems that we have with adding a light. That said, let's take a look in here. Are we getting the advantage of that? I'm not really seeing a whole lot of that in here. We probably weren't getting enough of that bounce in there to really have it be effective. Here we're getting a little bit more. I can see a little bit more of that reflector in here where it's highlighting a little bit more. That's good, very subtle. On the first one, I don't think we had the reflector in there enough. Here we're getting it a little bit better. Notice how nice and beautiful this gradation is. That's what we're going for. That's definitely what we're going for. We'll continue to think about composition as we go. This one's a little bit better, where you're allowing things to run off the edge. We're getting a little bit more formal. The lighting is definitely harsh and directional, but you've got the light being redirected back in here. These are much better. These are much better, although same composition, pretty much. We want to vary that composition much, much more. Much, much more. Like doing, we don't want to do the same drawing over and over again. Same thing, we don't want to do the same photograph over and over again. So let's look at the last one here, which is the hardness. Now, hardness is all about the shadows. Shadows, whether they're crisp edge to the shadow, whether they're soft edge to the shadow, but it's also helps with kind of creating this overall softness. Now, because we're creating that softness, it's really important that we have a handle on the key light and the direction, because with that softness also comes this sort of diffusion that can sort of dissolve the feeling of the photograph, make it feel just sort of like nothing, no atmosphere. So we really need to be able to have a very strong directional key light, even when we diffuse it, so that we still have that feeling of time, and we still have that feeling of the power of that directional lighting. That's why we start out with direction. That's why only afterward we start to diffuse it, because then we're sort of modifying the direction, not trying to create direction out of something that's already passively diffused. Now, again, this composition, still the same, right? So now that we know that, we're not going to continue to do that on future ones. Getting closer, again, that's something that everybody's going to pretty much kind of take away from most of these critiques that I do when I'm talking. If you go to other critiques, you're going to hear me saying some of the same things. You're certainly not the only one that I'm saying, get closer, get closer. These are some of the same things that we want to be doing. We do have a little bit of a focus issue here, where I'm looking to see where the focus is. It looks like you might have missed the focus a little bit. Camera focus is a really important thing, especially when we're in these kind of situations. Manual focus is always a good idea, because we can really get in there and we can control it, but it does mean we have to manually focus. We have to pay attention every single time to refocus, get in there and refocus it every time. And it's just an extra step, but it's an extra step of control that we want to take advantage of. So don't forget to refocus your camera in between your shots, or at least check the focus in between shots, so that you're sure that it's still happening that way. So that's basically what I have for you. Like I said, there will be plenty of opportunities for you to make some corrections if you feel like you need to. You're pretty much on track with what you need to be doing. I mean, it's not as if you've done a poor job at all on the compositions or on the project at all. This is really an exploration. The feedback I'm offering you is just really how to improve. And if you have other questions, be sure to ask. I mean, I'll elaborate as much as you need. So I look forward to seeing more of your photographs, and we'll see you in the studio. All right, bye now.